And I don't know, maybe a little bit rubbed off on each of us, but we found a living peace between us. Well, one of the items that Hooch, Chris Minson, loved was his animals back where he lived. But unfortunately, when you go overseas like that, they don't let you take your animals with you in that way. And what he really missed was his mouse or rat or something. I don't know which one. And he couldn't take it. So the first week while he was staying there, he couldn't go to bed. He just couldn't sleep without his mouse, rat, whatever it was. Mouse, let's say mouse. And I didn't understand why. I don't really care. I'm tired. I fall asleep. Well, about a week later, he comes into our little living space with this cage. And because it isn't the highest tech, because I wouldn't call it smuggling, but because he brought it in, he had to get some older stuff. So it's like, remember that old stainless steel caging? This was when they made everything out of metal, cars, lunch boxes, stuff like that. So it was made out of metal, and he had found a rodent that someone sold him. And so he put this cage in our room. He put the little mousey in it, and the day happened, and I didn't mind at all. He was this little mousy little thing, really quiet, hidden underneath the hay or grass or whatever was in there. But then that first night came. What do you think happened? What do you mice do at night? Well, he had bought this wheel for it, and it was metal, the old-fashioned wheel. And what did I hear all night long? Squeak, 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 squeak. It's like birds, running on top of sheet metal. It's constantly all night long. The squeak, squeak, squeak. And I couldn't go to bed. That thing annoyed me to death. Honest to goodness, I was about ready to go down and deal with the both of them. It was a pain. And night after night, this would go on, and I'd say, get rid of that rat or mouse or whatever that thing is. Get rid of it. It's driving me nuts. Oh, no, I've got it. I don't want to. They'll just, hurt it. I don't want to do. So we go back and forth. And so a week would pass, and finally, I would lay there in bed and eventually nod off. And then the weeks would go by, and I would figure it out, right? My body would adjust to this new noise that was brought into my world. This darn thing demands your attention. You got to feed it, clean it, and then it's got to sit there and squeak all night. So no matter what I do, I'm stuck with it. So I get used to it. Okay, well, Christmas time comes, and I fly home. And I go to my beautiful home, which is my parents' home, and I go in, and so decorated wonderfully. I'm so happy to be home. And I went up to sleep that night. And my room is just as quiet as a tomb on Easter, okay? Just empty. And I just stared at the ceiling, and I couldn't go to bed. I'd gotten so used to the squeak, 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 squeak in that rhythmic fashion all night that not only did I get used to it, I was dependent on it now. That noise had so entered into my life that I needed it to live. And so I went and got some, well, I'm not even going to tell you what the technology was back then. I got some earbuds. They weren't quite that back then. Put some headphones on with this cord. It attaches to them, and you plug it into things. And I listened to music, and I was able to fall asleep. But I'd gotten addicted to the noise. Now, this is one small little piece of noise into our life, but we heard about something else today in our scripture reading. Solomon is about to have 1,000 people with noise in his life. Solomon, one of the smartest people in the room, is about to be enveloped with noise. People wanting his ear, people wanting his attention, people wanting him to react, people wanting him to make decisions. And that's going to completely get to the heart of him. And it's so funny when we look at this noise, when we look at this ramping up of life, how it hasn't changed a lick from Solomon's time to us today. You are exactly like Solomon, and you're living in the same environment that he lived in. And that's a pretty bold statement, but give me some time. We're going to take a little look at how we can live through this and maybe help a few people along the way. Solomon had a busy life. He started off by asking for wisdom, and that was good. Can you imagine an older teenager, a young 20-something, when he could ask for anything, ask for more knowledge? Yeah. So God says, good job, I'm going to give it to you without fault. And then from there, he goes on to start building Solomon's temple. This was the temple of the Lord. His people had been nomads, meaning they walked around in tents forever, and now finally they're being brought to a point that still to today is being contended over, but the temple is now being built finally. The ark is going to come into the covenant, which has all of their precious items in it. And it's all going to come together, and he gets to do this, which is exciting. And then he goes to putting together the work of all the wisdom that he's gained over his life. Because that's why the teaching profession is so noble, is that you don't hold that power, you give it away, right? You teach what you know so that others are emboldened and strengthened throughout their life. And so he begins to write all this stuff down. Then come the wives. This is an interesting transformation. And I will say this, a good spouse, you don't need to get married, by the way. Paul, I agree with Paul. You don't have to do that nonsense. You can do whatever you want to do. But if you do, know this. A spouse is as precious, a good one is as precious as rubies and jewels. They're hard to come by. And it's so amazing when you find someone in this world that's willing to put up with you, to put up with your kind of weird, right? Because we're all broken. But someone who's willing to go, I'll deal with that broken if you deal with my broken. And then you're together, and it's a cool thing as we go through. They're far more than anything in this world. Because as you grow together, you begin to listen to each other. You have each other's ear like no other, and you make the biggest impact on one another. You really do. For good or for ill, you do. And so you begin to see this being played out in Solomon's life. Now, most of us, will have very few opportunities to have this type of relationship in our life, okay? But for Solomon, it was a bit more. He had 1,000 wives. 1, 0, 0, I don't even have enough fingers to do this. 1,000 spouses. If you think the one that you have now is impacting your life, add 999 to that. You begin immediately to see the issue for Solomon. You have all of these individuals who, if it's done right in a loving relationship, will listen to you, will have your ear, will have your best, outcomes, your best life as important to them. Well, when you have 1,000 jostling over this, how does this affect you? Quite a bit, right? And so you have these marriages. And Solomon had marriages made in blank. Well, marriage was a tool of diplomacy back then, so don't think he's some lush or some weirdo or anything compared to our time. This was something kings did. It was a tool of diplomacy throughout the whole ancient Near East that would cement alliances. It would establish treaties. It would maybe give you a discount on the Lebanon timber that you needed for the temple. It would do quite a bit. And so there were two classes of wives for Solomon, two. The first was the royal class. The royal class. So you were high enough in society that if you married in, then your children would be part of the line of succession, meaning if the king passed away and the 395 others in front of you passed, you would be up and you could be king. Okay? You're part of that line. And if you had 700 of those, how many kids would come out of that? I wonder what the last one was, like 400 millionth in line, I don't know, 4,000th in line to the king, but you were at least part of that. Then you had concubines. They were the same as his wives, absolutely, except their children didn't have any claim on the crown, okay? They couldn't be part of that succession. Though how amazingly impossible it would have been for the others, though the concubines, it just wouldn't have been so at all. So that's what we're catching up to today as we read. Solomon had 700 wives of royal birth and 300 concubines, and his wives led him astray. Okay, so you can say, do whatever you want to in today's climate. This is the story we have, and this is what happened. His wives led him astray. They listen, right? It's hard not to listen. Because I love my wife, I listen. And over time, though most of the major flaws I have never go away, you can change the ship a little over time with great patience and lots of instruction. You can work on a person. But think of the amount of noise that was in Solomon's life. all of this intrigue, all of this pressure, all of this interest in gaining a little bit of his favor, having his ear. Can you imagine the noise that surrounded Solomon? It must have been vast. All of this day after day after day of noise in his life. And eventually, it says, Solomon grew old. Now, I don't know if growing old changes a person, but I do know even I am getting to the point where it's like, you know what, I can't wait till I get that jitterbug phone. It just has 2 things on it, and I just hit green, and I can have a real person on the other side, and I don't have to worry about all this anymore. There is some sense of that goes on, right? And he's just worn out of the noise. Constant. And so that guard, that precious, treasured peace that God gave him begins to push that away. And he begins to protect himself with something else. As Solomon grew old, his wives turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not fully devoted to the Lord, his God, anymore. He had stopped listening to the one true God and started listening to all the other voices around him. That's a problem. But it's hard when you get constantly overwhelmed with noise. He followed all sorts of craziness, these goddesses from the south, these gods from the north. He just couldn't help himself. And so he turned away, and not only did he not listen to God anymore, he started following other gods and goddesses. And what's crazy about that is he started building temples for all of them. He started building temples. And God looked at these and said, these are detestable gods. What are you doing? You know this is terrible. And he did the same for all his foreign wives. Yikes. How many wives did he have again? He built stuff for all of them? What a mess. Can you imagine what his life would have been like? You think the Christian calendar has stuff. Think about 1,000 other calendars to keep. The noise and distraction in his life must have been overwhelming. Overwhelming. And yet, that's what happens. This world, even today, is filled with lords, these lowercase l lords that demand our attention and lead to frustration. Lead to frustration and eventually death. I feel for our children. Their minds are fantastic because they're able to do something that we didn't have to deal with. It was just starting. Do you know the amount of information flowing into a child today? All the different information sources? You know how many lords are in your children's lives every day? Overwhelming them? And the technology only does what? I mean, it only ramps that up. I came out of a field where we partly were responsible for this. And I don't blame the kids because it's my generation and around me that are doing this. We're the ones that have the money and are doing this to get people's attention. It is absolutely amazing when I see my kids on the phone and all the information that they're cycling through. Have you ever watched someone just scroll through all that information, all that input? Our children have developed an ability to sort through thousands of data points an hour to decide what's important and what isn't to them. Boom. Does that not affect how your brain is wired? Absolutely it is. We're still learning what this is about. Do you think that's any different than Solomon in his age? With all this information flooding into him? All we've done is enabled all these noises, all these voices to come into our very homes and into our lives. I even have an Apple Watch. So I said their name. I hope they watch this and send me a free product. You even have an Apple Watch. What does it do about 3 or 4 times a minute? It wants your attention. It wants to drag you in, break what you're doing, break your thought. All these little nano interruptions in our life affect us, and it begins to create this ball of frustration that society is beginning to see, aren't we? What happens when we live a life like this? It overwhelms us, this noise. We get addicted to it. These lords are anything that holds sway over you. Now, I said I brought up the technology, but if I took away cigarettes from a smoker, what would you see? If I took away the nice car from someone and gave them a bus pass for a month, what would you see? If I took away clothes and said, you can only wear these three outfits for the next month, keep them clean, what would we see? There are so many lords in our life that scream for our attention and demand our allegiance. You're being contended over in ways you probably don't even notice anymore because you get used to it. And now you depend on it. To the point where Bose is now making, free product, Bose is now making sleep buds that you put in your ear, and it creates white noise so that you can get to sleep. Because what are we addicted to? We got to have it. It's annoying, but we got to have it. We've gotten used to it. It's become quite an interesting. The biggest issue when it came to Solomon, besides all this craziness that was going on, I highlighted the word up on the screen. What was affected most by the noise? What does it say? His heart, who he was, what he was about. It affected him, and he started to wall away the Lord, the one true voice. And it led to a lot of terrible things in his life and for his kingdom. And God told him this, and this is the better translation for us. So the Lord said to Solomon, since this is your attitude, it will most certainly tear the kingdom away from you. In other words, I'm not going to strip this away from you, though he points out your behavior, your attitude, your heart is what's stripping away this kingdom. I'm just going to tell you what's about to happen. This is what it leads to. All this noise, all this craziness causes an attitude that destroys around us. It breaks down. And don't get me wrong, tech is fun, but it doesn't bring happiness. Stuff is fun, but it doesn't bring happiness. And so, yes, this world is filled with these lords, but praise be to God that the world is also filled with the one true Lord who brings something very special. From frustration, God brings contentment and life into our world. Contentment and life. This is very, 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 very important for us. We just talked about the heart, guarding the heart, what we long for. Where that heart follows, these lords crying out to us, trying to grab the heart, because if I have that, I'll sell a bunch of stuff. If I got that, I'll get a bunch of things. And so we begin to guard the heart, but we just have to make sure that we understand where that true life comes from. This contentment comes from the relationship with Jesus Christ. Jesus says, love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, with all of your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. There's always a relationship. It's always a heart issue. Where does your ear turn in trouble? Where does your ear turn in times of goodness? Where does your ear turn for wisdom and strength and contentment? Jesus summed it up. It's the heart issue. And it goes all the way back to the beginning of our teachings. Part of this is the Ten Commandments. It starts off by saying, I am the Lord, your God. So I am the Lord, I am the one God, and I'm giving myself to you. I'm yours. I am the Lord, your God. And because I am the God, and I'm giving myself to you, what don't you need now? What don't you need? All the other lords, right? You don't need them. You just don't need them. So what's the first command? You shall have no other gods. It wasn't a punishment. It was a promise. I'm yours. Turn to me. I've got you. Don't pray to the stars. I created them. Pray to me. Don't pray to the systems. I built them. Pray to me. It's such a wonderful peace that we have in our life. And Jesus is following this by telling us, not only am I the truth and the life, but I'm also the way, how you live out your life. Because it is the most humanly authentic way for us to live. This is what I mean. And this is partly why I'm a Christian. God knows you're going to fail. He knows there's no way you're going to be able to do 50% good and earn your way to anything. He knows that you struggle, that you try, that these spiritual giants, just like Solomon, remember all those the last 50 years that rose up to political and TV fame? What happened to just about every one of them? Because they're human, they fail. There's no one better than anyone else. And so God is saying, I will give you the way that you may live as well, not only eternally, but on earth to find contentment, to find peace, to find life. How amazing is that? And do you want to know what the fruits of living Jesus' way looks like? Is your life filled with these fruits, these complicated, wonderful blessings? Can I come to you on a very busy day of your life and sit down and ask, okay, is your life today filled with love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and goodness and faithfulness and gentleness and self-control today? That's what comes out of Jesus. That's what he brings into our world. It's very interesting, isn't it? It's very interesting. And so that's what we want. I want that in my life. I'm always fascinated by the gentleman or lady who's in the back of the room when all HEL is breaking loose and they look like this. You know, they're quiet, they're smiling, they look like they know what they're doing. So I gravitate to those people and go, why do you have courage and faith in all this mess? Because if you think you're going to do anything to change this madhouse from what it is, good luck. How do you have that? And every time it comes from a relationship with the true God. Because they know, well, who to turn. It's a wonderful thing. So, this world is full of lords, and it's also filled with the one true Lord. It's certainly filled with believers that can do something about it, okay? It's also filled with believers. Is it not? How about this room? Let's just take a pulse. I think there are believers in this room. Don't get me wrong. I know everywhere there's believers, non-believers, and make-believers. We're loaded with all of those. But the world is full of believers who can do something about it. It's kind of fun. First, and it's a bad word, it's called fast. Ugh. It has nothing to do with Friday and fish. I'll save you the trouble. What fasting does is this. Take something away in your life and see if it hurts by taking it away. That's what fasting is about. Fasting, first and foremost, means stopping something that is a lord in your life and seeing how you do without it. If I took my phone away from my oldest daughter, what would she do for that week? Be honest. She would start jonesing. Is that the right term? It looked like an addict being taken something away because they get used to it. And when you take something away, you know that's a lord because it demands your attention and you can't live without it. Like that squeak. I couldn't sleep anymore without it. And it can be all sorts. I'm not picking on them. If I took cigarettes away from a smoker, what would happen? If I took, again, a car away or clothing, and what would we do? There are all different lords in our life. If there's a demand, there's a supplier. First, it identifies what they are. And even if you can't do anything about it, don't you really want to know who's running your life? Don't you want to know who's really controlling your life? I do. Even if I fail, I guess, at least I know that Apple runs my life now. You know all that contract that I didn't read? Somewhere in there it says it's going to take half my life, and I didn't read it. But I click it so I can get my apps updated. At least I know. So we can identify where those lords are in our life and in our world, yes? But also, it gives us a chance as believers to live differently, to live as Jesus taught us. Do you want to know one of the teachings that Jesus brings to us is this? Pick one day a week to just stop. Stop. Not an hour. If you want to go sunrise to sunset, I don't care. You can make all the crazy human rules you want. He said for one day, rest. Stop. Because if you don't, you're going to kill yourself. You're going to get ulcers. You're going to wear those knees out. You're going to lose your hair. All these things are going to happen. You're going to gray early. All these things are going to happen if you don't stop. And then he said, in that same time, I want you to focus on what matters most to you. Family. God. Do you spend that time? How many hours, minutes in a day do you read the Word of God, believers? Or pray? If you think not much, you're not alone. But what's filling that time then? What's filling that other space? All the other lords. They are winning. They've got your ear. And so, if we live as Jesus taught us, even that rest period where we just focus on family, eat with them, stop, is very important for us. It really does impact us. Well, the last little bit, and we'll land today. The world is also full of believers that can help others around us. If you know that contentment and peace in life come from Jesus Christ in that relationship and the way that he has taught us as believers to live, when you see a mother or father overwhelmed, when you look at a coworker that's overloaded in life and is about ready to implode, when you see a neighbor struggling, it's not just the way the world is. God has put you there for a reason. It's important. One of the learnings we've had as a church is, with all the flooding going on, I'm really concerned about who actually helps people, because a lot of people donate, but what organizations, what actually helps them out? And I've learned a lot about who actually helped and who was just in it for the press. It's fascinating. And because I just don't help a family that first week and then we walk away, our church follows up 6 months and a year later, just to make sure. So as I'm delivering these checks, because you have given us money, as I'm delivering us checks to these families, do you know what's amazing about it all? It's what they asked would truly have helped them. And they didn't even know before it happened. And I heard this repeated over and over again. One mother said this: "Thank you for all your help, but you know what would really have helped us? If you would have come down and had something for our kids to do for 4 hours, 5 hours, while we threw away everything they had." You know how hard it is to throw away toys from a 5-year-old, a third grader, throw away everything they had because it's moldy and wet? But I would have loved someone just to come and take the kids for a while. Is that some big thing that we have to orchestrate? Or that's something where everyone, wherever you're at, can bring that bit of peace into a person's life because God has poured it into you. Oh, I'm writing it down now. Trust me, next time it happens, we're on that, right? That's something we all can do. That's something we know, right? And yet it comes down to usually the most simplest, everyday, ordinary stuff. That's where God and the gospel live, wherever you are. So, we read, "A new commandment I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another." Let's read the last one together, verse 35, because this is pretty haunting. "By this, all men will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another." He isn't saying you got to manufacture something you don't got. Just take what I've given you and hand it off. Then they'll know who you are. Then they'll know who you are. And eventually they'll ask, "What's up with you?" Smiling in the back of the corner while all HEL is going all over the place. What's up with you? It matters, right? All right, let's end up today, yeah? God is the only one who can meet our deepest heart needs. People cannot. Possessions cannot. They're fun, but they don't bring happiness. Power and prestige cannot. We were created to find our truest satisfaction in this relationship with God above everything else. And when that's lacking, the world hurts. And as a Christian, one of our biggest challenges is to stay focused on God. So there is a need to constantly check ourselves to make sure nothing comes between us in this relationship. And we need each other to remind us, but we also need to take those times and maybe check ourselves. Fast a little. But even more, as a Christian, we know what brings true life. I just told you. You know what you can do. Brings true life when we see others struggling. Jesus tells us to love others as we have been loved. And so we pour that out to them. Not with some billboards or signs or Bible thumping or yelling or screaming. You just help a mom and a dad take care of the kids while they throw away everything they own. That doesn't sound too crazy to me.